Chapter 2. During his master's absence at Surabaya, Wang had busied himself with the ground immediately in front of the principal bungalow. Emerging from the fringe of grass growing across the shore end of the coal jetty, Haste beheld a broad, clear space, black and level, with only one or two clumps of charred twigs, where the flame had swept from the front of his house to the nearest trees of the forest. "You took the risk of firing the grass?" Haste asked. Wang nodded. Hanging on the arm of the white man before whom he stood was the girl called Alma, but neither from the Chinaman's eyes nor from his expression could anyone have guessed that he was in the slightest degree aware of the fact. "He has been tidying the place up in his labour-saving way," explained Haste, without looking at the girl, whose hand rested on his forearm. "He's the whole establishment, you see. I told you I hadn't even a dog to keep me company here." Wang had marched off towards the wharf. "He's like those waiters in that place," she said. That place was Schomburg's hotel. "One Chinaman looks very much like another," Haste remarked. "We shall find it useful to have him here. This is the house." They faced, at some distance, the 6 shallow steps leading up to the veranda. The girl had abandoned Haste's arm. "This is the house," he repeated. She did not offer to budge away from his side, but stood staring fixedly at the steps, as if they had been something unique and impracticable. He waited a little, but she did not move. "Don't you want to go in?" he asked, without turning his head to look at her. "The sun's too heavy to stand about here." He tried to overcome a sort of fear, a sort of impatient faintness, and his voice sounded rough. "You had better go in," he concluded. They both moved then, but at the foot of the stairs Haste stopped, where the girl went on rapidly, as if nothing could stop her now. She crossed the veranda swiftly, and entered the twilight of the big central room opening upon it, and then the deeper twilight of the room beyond. She stood still in the dusk, in which her dazzled eyes could scarcely make out the forms of objects, and sighed a sigh of relief. The impression of the sunlight, of sea and sky, remained with her like a memory of a painful trial gone through, done with at last. Meanwhile, Haste had walked back slowly towards the jetty, but he did not get so far as that. The practical and automatic Wang had got hold of one of the little trucks that had been used for running baskets of coal alongside ships. He appeared pushing it before him, loaded slightly with Haste's bag and the bundle of the girl's belongings, wrapped in Mrs. Schomburg's shawl. Haste turned about and walked by the side of the rusty rails on which the truck ran. Opposite the house, Wang stopped, lifted the bag to his shoulder, balanced it carefully, and then took the bundle in his hand. "Leave those things on the table in the big room, understand?" "Oh, me savvy, grunted Wang, moving off. Haste watched the Chinaman disappear from the veranda. It was not till he had seen Wang come out that he himself entered the twilight of the big room. By that time Wang was out of sight at the back of the house, but by no means out of hearing. The Chinaman could hear the voice of him who, when there were many people there, was generally referred to as "Number 1. Wang was not able to understand the words, but the tone interested him. "Where are you?" cried Number 1. Then Wang heard, much more faint, a voice he had never heard before, a novel impression which he acknowledged by cocking his head slightly to one side. "I'm here, out of the sun." The new voice sounded remote and uncertain. Wang heard nothing more, though he waited for some time, very still, the top of his shaven poll exactly level with the floor of the back veranda. His face, meanwhile, preserved an inscrutable immobility. Suddenly he stooped to pick up the lid of a deal candle box, which was lying on the ground by his foot. Breaking it up with his fingers, he directed his steps towards the cook-shed, where, squatting on his heels, he proceeded to kindle a small fire under a very sooty kettle, possibly to make tea. Wang had some knowledge of the more superficial rites and ceremonies of white men's existence, otherwise so enigmatically remote to his mind, and containing unexpected possibilities of good and evil, which had to be watched for with prudence and care. Chapter 3. That morning, as on all the others of the full tale of mornings since his return with the girl to Samburan, Haste came out on the veranda and spread his elbows on the railing, in an easy attitude of proprietorship. The bulk of the central ridge of the island cut off the bungalow from sunrises, whether glorious or cloudy, angry or serene. The dwellers therein were debarred from reading early the fortune of the newborn day. It sprang upon them in its fullness with a swift retreat of the great shadow, when the sun, clearing the ridge, looked down, hot and dry, with a devouring glare like the eye of an enemy. But haste, once the number one of this locality, while it was comparatively teeming with mankind, appreciated the prolongation of early coolness, the subdued, lingering half-light, the faint ghost of the departed night, the fragrance of its dewy, dark soul captured for a moment longer between the great glow of the sky and the intense blaze of the uncovered sea. It was naturally difficult for Haste to keep his mind from dwelling on the nature and consequences of this, his latest departure from the part of an unconcerned spectator. Yet he had retained enough of his wrecked philosophy to prevent him from asking himself consciously how it would end. But at the same time he could not help being temperamentally, from long habit and from set purpose, a spectator still, perhaps a little less naive, but, as he discovered with some surprise, not much more far-sighted than the common run of men. Like the rest of us who act, all he could say to himself, with a somewhat affected grimness, was, "We shall see." This mood of grim doubt intruded on him only when he was alone. There were not many such moments in his day now, and he did not like them when they came. On this morning he had no time to grow uneasy. Alma came out to join him long before the sun, rising above the Samburan ridge, swept the cool shadow of the early morning and the remnant of the night's coolness clear off the roof under which they had dwelt for more than 3 months already. She came out as on other mornings. He had heard her light footsteps in the big room, the room where he had unpacked the cases from London, the room now lined with the backs of books halfway up on its 3 sides. Above the cases the fine matting met the ceiling of tightly stretched white calico. In the dusk and coolness nothing gleamed except the gilt frame of the portrait of Haste's father, signed by a famous painter, lonely in the middle of a wall. Haste did not turn round. "Do you know what I was thinking of?" he asked. "No," she said. Her tone betrayed always a shade of anxiety, as though she were never certain how a conversation with him would end. She leaned on the guardrail by his side. "No," she repeated. "What was it?" She waited. Then, rather with reluctance than shyness, she asked, "Were you thinking of me?" "I was wondering when you would come out," said Haste, still without looking at the girl, to whom, after several experimental essays in combining detached letters and loose syllables, he had given the name of Lena. She remarked, after a pause, "I was not very far from you. Apparently you are not near enough for me." "You could have called if you wanted me," she said. "And I wasn't so long doing my hair. Apparently it was too long for me. Well, you were thinking of me anyhow. I'm glad of it. Do you know, it seems to me, somehow, that if you were to stop thinking of me, I shouldn't be in the world at all." He turned round and looked at her. She often said things which surprised him. A vague smile faded away on her lips before his scrutiny. "What is it?" he asked. "Is it a reproach?" "A reproach? Why, how could it be?" she defended herself. "Well, what did it mean?" he insisted. "What I said. Just what I said." "Why aren't you fair?" "Ah, this is at least a reproach." She coloured to the roots of her hair. "It looks as if you were trying to make out that I'm disagreeable," she murmured. "Am I? You will make me afraid to open my mouth presently. I shall end by believing I'm no good." Her head drooped a little. He looked at her smooth, low brow, the faintly coloured cheeks, and the red lips parted slightly, with the gleam of her teeth within. "And then I won't be any good," she added with conviction. "That I won't. I can only be what you think I am." He made a slight movement. She put her hand on his arm, without raising her head, and went on, her voice animated in the stillness of her body. "It is so. It couldn't be any other way with a girl like me and a man like you. Here we are, we two alone, and I can't even tell where we are." "A very well-known spot of the globe," Haste uttered gently. "There must have been at least 50,000 circulars issued at the time. 150,000 more likely. My friend was looking after that, and his ideas were large and his belief very strong. Of us two, it was he who had the faith. 150,000 certainly." "What is it you mean?" she asked in a low tone. "What should I find fault with you for?" Haste went on. "For being amiable, good, gracious, and pretty?" A silence fell. Then she said, "It's all right that you should think that of me. There's no one here to think anything of us, good or bad." The rare timbre of her voice gave a special value to what she uttered. The indefinable emotion which certain intonations gave him, he was aware, was more physical than moral. Every time she spoke to him, she seemed to abandon to him something of herself, something excessively subtle and inexpressible, to which he was infinitely sensible, which he would have missed horribly if she were to go away. While he was looking into her eyes, she raised her bare forearm out of the short sleeve and held it in the air till he noticed it, and hastened to pose his great bronze moustaches on the whiteness of the skin. Then they went in. Wang immediately appeared in front, and squatting on his heels, began to potter mysteriously about some plants at the foot of the veranda. When Haste and the girl came out again, the Chinaman had gone in his peculiar manner, which suggested vanishing out of existence rather than out of sight, a process of evaporation rather than of movement. They descended the steps, looking at each other, and started off smartly across the cleared ground. But they were not 10 yards away when, without perceptible stir or sound, Wang materialized inside the empty room. The Chinaman stood still with roaming eyes, examining the walls as if for signs, for inscriptions, exploring the floor as if for pitfalls, for dropped coins. Then he cocked his head slightly at the profile of Haste's father, pen in hand above a white sheet of paper on a crimson tablecloth, and moving noiselessly forward, began to clear away the breakfast things. Though he proceeded without haste, the unerring precision of his movements, the absolute soundlessness of the operation, gave it something of the quality of a conjuring trick. And, the trick having been performed, Wang vanished from the scene to materialize presently in front of the house. He materialized walking away from it with no visible or guessable intention, but at the end of some 10 paces he stopped, made a half-turn, and put his hand up to shade his eyes. The sun had topped the grey ridge of Samburan. The great morning shadow was gone, and far away in the devouring sunshine Wang was in time to see number 1 and the woman, 2 remote white specks against the sombre line of the forest. In a moment they vanished. With the smallest display of action, Wang also vanished from the sunlight of the clearing. Haste and Lena entered the shade of the forest path which crossed the island, and which, near its highest point, had been blocked by felled trees. But their intention was not to go so far. After keeping to the path for some distance, they left it at a point where the forest was bare of undergrowth, and the trees, festooned with creepers, stood clear of one another in the gloom of their own making. Here and there great splashes of light lay on the ground. They moved, silent in the great stillness, breathing the calmness, the infinite isolation, the repose of a slumber without dreams. They emerged at the upper limit of vegetation, among some rocks, and in a depression of the sharp slope, like a small platform, they turned about and looked from on high over the sea, lonely, its colour effaced by sunshine, its horizon a heat mist, a mere unsubstantial shimmer in the pale and blinding infinity, overhung by the darker blaze of the sky. "It makes my head swim," the girl murmured, shutting her eyes and putting her hand on his shoulder. Haste, gazing fixedly to the southward, exclaimed, "Sail ho!" A moment of silence ensued. "It must be very far away," he went on. "I don't think you could see it. Some native craft making for the Moluccas, possibly. Come, we mustn't stay here." With his arm around her waist, he led her down a little distance, and they settled themselves in the shade. She, seated on the ground, he a little lower, reclining at her feet. "You don't like to look at the sea from up there?" he said, after a long time. She shook her head. That empty space was to her the abomination of desolation. But she only said again, "It makes my head swim." "Too big?" he inquired. "Too lonely. It makes my heart sink, too," she added in a low voice, as if confessing a secret. "I'm afraid," said Haste, "that you would be justified in reproaching me for these sensations. But what would you have?" His tone was playful, but his eyes, directed at her face, were serious. She protested. "I'm not feeling lonely with you, not a bit. It's only when we come up to that place, and I look at all that water and all that light, "We will never come here again, then," he interrupted her. She remained silent for a while, returning his gaze till he removed it. "It seems as if everything that there is had gone under," she said. "Reminds you of the story of the deluge," muttered the man, stretched at her feet and looking at them. "Are you frightened of it?" "I should be rather frightened to be left behind alone. When I say I, of course I mean we." "Do you?" Haste remained silent for a while. "The vision of a world destroyed," he mused aloud. "Would you be sorry for it?" "I should be sorry for the happy people in it," she said simply. His gaze travelled up her figure and reached her face, where he seemed to detect the veiled glow of intelligence, as one gets a glimpse of the sun through the clouds. "I should have thought it's they specially who ought to have been congratulated, don't you?" "Oh, yes, I understand what you mean. But there were 40 days before it was all over. You seem to be in possession of all the details." Haste spoke just to say something rather than gaze at her in silence. She was not looking at him. "Sunday school," she murmured. "I went regularly from the time I was 8 till I was 13. We lodged in the north of London, off Kingsland Road. It wasn't a bad time. Father was earning good money then. The woman of the house used to pack me off in the afternoon with her own girls. She was a good woman. Her husband was in the post office, sorter or something. Such a quiet man. He used to go off after supper for night duty sometimes. Then one day they had a row and broke up the home. I remember I cried when we had to pack up all of a sudden and go into other lodgings. I never knew what it was, though." "Deluge," muttered Haste absently. He felt intensely aware of her personality, as if this were the first moment of leisure he had found to look at her since they had come together. The peculiar timbre of her voice, with its modulations of audacity and sadness, would have given interest to the most inane chatter. But she was no chatterer. She was rather silent, with a capacity for immobility, an upright stillness, as when resting on the concert platform between the musical numbers, her feet crossed, her hands reposing on her lap. But in the intimacy of their life, her grey, unabashed gaze forced upon him the sensation of something inexplicable reposing within her. Stupidity or inspiration, weakness or force, or simply an abysmal emptiness, reserving itself even in the moments of complete surrender. During a long pause she did not look at him. Then suddenly, as if the word deluge had suddenly stuck in her mind, she asked, looking up at the cloudless sky, "Does it ever rain here?" "There is a season when it rains almost every day," said Haste, surprised. "There are also thunderstorms. We once had a mud shower." "Mud shower?" "Our neighbour there was shooting up ashes. He sometimes clears his red-hot gullet like that, and the thunderstorm came along at the same time. It was very messy, but our neighbour is generally well behaved. Just smokes quietly, as he did that day when I first showed you the smudge in the sky from the schooner's deck. He's a good-natured, lazy fellow of a volcano." "I saw a mountain smoking like that before," she said, staring at the slender stem of a tree fern some dozen feet in front of her. "It wasn't very long after we left England. Some few days, though. I was so ill at first that I lost count of days. A smoking mountain. I can't think how they called it." "Vesuvius, perhaps?" suggested Haste. "That's the name." "I saw it too, ages ago," said Haste. "On your way here?" "No, long before I ever thought of coming into this part of the world. I was yet a boy." She turned and looked at him attentively, as if seeking to discover some trace of that boyhood in the mature face of the man with the hair thin at the top and the long, thick moustaches. Haste stood the frank examination with a playful smile, hiding the profound effect these veiled grey eyes produced. Whether on his heart or on his nerves, whether sensuous or spiritual, tender or irritating, he was unable to say. "Well, Princess of Samburan," he said at last, "have I found favour in your sight?" She seemed to wake up and shook her head. "I was thinking," she murmured very low. "Thought, action, oh, so many snares. If you begin to think, you will be unhappy." "I wasn't thinking of myself," she declared with a simplicity which took Haste aback somewhat. On the lips of a moralist this would sound like a rebuke, he said, half seriously, but I won't suspect you of being one. Moralists and I haven't been friends for many years. She had listened with an air of attention. I understood you had no friends, she said. I'm pleased that there's nobody to find fault with you for what you've done. I like to think that I'm in no one's way. Haste would have said something, but she did not give him time. Unconscious of the movement he made, she went on, What I was thinking to myself was, why are you here? Haste let himself sink on his elbow again. If by you mean we, well, you know why we're here. She bent her gaze down at him. No, it isn't that. I meant before. All that time before you came across me and guessed at once that I was in trouble, with no one to turn to. And you know, it was desperate trouble too. Her voice fell on the last words, as if she would end there. But there was something so expectant in Haste's attitude as he sat at her feet, looking up at her steadily, that she continued, after drawing a short, quick breath, It was, really. I told you I'd been worried before by bad fellows. It made me unhappy, disturbed, angry too. But oh, how I hated that man. That man was the florid Schomburg with the military bearing, benefactor of white men, decent food to eat in decent company, mature victim of belated fashion. The girl shuddered. The characteristic harmoniousness of her face became, as it were, decomposed for an instant. Haste was startled. Why think of it now? He cried. It's because I was cornered that time. It wasn't as before. It was worse, ever so much. I wished I could die in my fright, and yet it's only now that I begin to understand what a horror it might have been. Yes, only now, since we... Haste stirred a little. Came here, he finished. Her tenseness relaxed. Her flushed face went gradually back to its normal tint. Yes, she said indifferently. But at the same time she gave him a stealthy glance of passionate appreciation, and then her face took on a melancholy cast. Her whole figure drooped imperceptibly. But you were coming back here anyhow? She asked. Yes, I was only waiting for Davidson. Yes, I was coming back here to these ruins, to Wang, who perhaps did not expect to see me again. It's impossible to guess at the way that the Chinaman draws his conclusions and how he looks upon one. Don't talk to me about him. He makes me feel uncomfortable. Talk about yourself. About myself? I see you are still busy with the mystery of my existence here, but it isn't at all mysterious. Primarily, the man with the quill pen in his hand in that picture you so often look at is responsible for my existence. He is also responsible for what my existence is, or rather has been. He was a great man in his way. I don't know much of his history. I suppose he began like other people. Took fine words for good ringing coin and noble ideals for valuable banknotes. He was a great master of both, himself, by the way. Later he discovered... How am I to explain it to you? Suppose the world were a factory and all mankind workmen in it. Well, he discovered that the wages were not good enough, that they were paid in counterfeit money. I see, the girl said slowly. Do you? Haste, who had been speaking as if to himself, looked up curiously. It wasn't a new discovery, but he brought his capacity for scorn to bear on it. It was immense. It ought to have withered this globe. I don't know how many minds he convinced, but my mind was very young then, and youth, I suppose, can easily be seduced, even by negation. He was very ruthless, and yet he was not without pity. He dominated me without difficulty. A heartless man could not have done so. Even to fools he was not utterly merciless. He could be indignant, but he was too great for flouts and jeers. What he said was not meant for the crowd. It could not be, and I was flattered to find myself among the elect. They read his books, but I have heard his living word. It was irresistible. It was as if that mind were taking me into its confidence, giving me a special insight into its mastery of despair. Mistake, no doubt. There is something of my father in every man who lives long enough. But they don't say anything. They can't. They wouldn't know how, or perhaps they wouldn't speak if they could. Man on this earth is an unforeseen accident which does not stand close investigation. However, that particular man died as quietly as a child goes to sleep. But after listening to him, I could not take my soul down into the street to fight there. I started off to wander about, an independent spectator, if that is possible. For a long time the girl's grey eyes had been watching his face. She discovered that, addressing her, he was really talking to himself. Haste looked up, caught sight of her, as it were, and caught himself up with a low laugh and a change of tone. All this does not tell you why I ever came here. Why, indeed? It's like prying into inscrutable mysteries which are not worth scrutinizing. A man drifts. The most successful men have drifted into their successes. I don't want to tell you this is a success. You wouldn't believe me if I did. It isn't. Neither is it the ruinous failure it looks. It proves nothing, unless perhaps some hidden weakness in my character, and even that is not certain. He looked fixedly at her, and with such grave eyes that he felt obliged to smile faintly at him, since she could not understand what he meant. Her smile was reflected still fainter on his lips. "This does not advance you much in your inquiry," he went on, "and in truth your question is unanswerable. But facts have a certain positive value, and I will tell you a fact. One day I met a cornered man. I use the word because it expresses the man's situation exactly, and because you just used it yourself. You know what that means?" "What do you say?" she whispered, astounded. "A man." Haste laughed at her wondering eyes. No, I mean in his own way." "I knew very well it couldn't be anything like that," she observed under her breath. "I won't bother you now with the story. It was a custom-house affair, strange as it may sound to you. He would have preferred to be killed outright, that is, to have his soul dispatched to another world, rather than be robbed of his substance, his very insignificant substance in this. I saw that he believed in another world because, being cornered, as I have told you, he went down on his knees and prayed. What do you think of that?" Haste paused. She looked at him earnestly. "You didn't make fun of him for that?" she said. Haste made a brusque movement of protest. "My dear girl, I am not a ruffian," he cried. Then, returning to his usual tone, "I didn't even have to conceal a smile. Somehow it didn't look a smiling matter. No, it was not funny. It was rather pathetic. He was so representative of all the past victims of the great joke. But it is by folly alone that the world moves, and so it is a respectable thing upon the whole. And besides, he was what one would call a good man. I don't mean especially because he had offered up a prayer. No, he was really a decent fellow. He was quite unfitted for this world. He was a failure, a good man cornered, a sight for the gods, for no decent mortal cares to look at that sort." A thought seemed to occur to him. He turned his face to the girl. "And you, who have been cornered too, did you think of offering a prayer?" Neither her eyes nor a single one of her features moved the least bit. She only let fall the words, "I'm not what they call a good girl." "That sounds evasive," said Haste, after a short silence. "Well, the good fellow did pray, and after he had confessed to it, I was struck by the comicality of the situation. No, don't misunderstand me. I'm not alluding to his act, of course. And even the idea of eternity, infinity, omnipotence being called upon to defeat the conspiracy of two miserable Portuguese half-castes did not move my mirth. From the point of view of the supplicant, the danger to be conjured was something like the end of the world, or worse. No, what captivated my fancy was that I, Axel Haste, the most detached of creatures in this earthly captivity, the veriest tramp on this earth, an indifferent stroller going through the world's bustle, that I should have been there to step into the situation of an agent of Providence. I, a man of universal scorn and unbelief." "You're putting it on," she interrupted in her seductive voice with a coaxing intonation. "No, I'm not like that. Born or fashioned, or both. I am not for nothing the son of my father, of that man in the painting. I am he, all but the genius. And there is even less in me than I make out, because the very scorn is falling away from me year after year. I have never been so amused as by that episode in which I was suddenly called to act such an incredible part. For a moment I enjoyed it greatly. It got him out of his corner, you know. You saved a man for fun? Is that what you mean? Just for fun? Why this tone of suspicion? Remonstrated Haste. I suppose the sight of this particular distress was disagreeable to me. What you call fun came afterwards, when it dawned on me that I was for him a walking, breathing, incarnate proof of the efficacy of prayer. I was a little fascinated by it. And then, could I have argued with him? You don't argue against such evidence, and besides it would have looked as if I had wanted to claim all the merit. Already his gratitude was simply frightful. Funny position, wasn't it? The boredom came later, when we lived together on board his ship. I had, in a moment of inadvertence, created for myself a tie. How to define it precisely, I don't know. One gets attached, in a way, to people one has done something for. But is that friendship? I am not so sure what it was. I only know that he who forms a tie is lost. The germ of corruption has entered into his soul. Haste's tone was light, with a flavour of playfulness, which seasoned all his speeches, and seemed to be of the very essence of his thoughts. The girl he had come across, of whom he had possessed himself, to whose presence he was not yet accustomed, with whom he did not yet know how to live, that human being so near and still so strange, gave him a greater sense of his own reality than he had ever known in all his life. Chapter 4. With her knees drawn up, Lena rested her elbows on them and held her head in both her hands. "Are you tired of sitting here?" Haste asked. An almost imperceptible negative movement of the head was all the answer she made. "Why are you looking so serious?" he pursued, and immediately thought that habitual seriousness in the long run was much more bearable than constant gaiety. "However, this expression suits you exceedingly," he added, not diplomatically, but because by the tendency of his taste it was a true statement. "And as long as I can be certain that it is not boredom which gives you this severe air, I am willing to sit here and look at you till you are ready to go." And this was true. He was still under the fresh sortilege of their common life, the surprise of novelty, the flattered vanity of his possession of this woman. For a man must feel that unless he has ceased to be masculine. Her eyes moved in his direction, rested on him, then returned to their stare into the deeper gloom at the foot of the straight tree trunks, whose spreading crowns were slowly withdrawing their shade. The warm air stirred slightly about her motionless head. She would not look at him, from some obscure fear of betraying herself. She felt in her innermost depths an irresistible desire to give herself up to him more completely, by some act of absolute sacrifice. This was something of which he did not seem to have an idea. He was a strange being without needs. She felt his eyes fixed upon her, and as he kept silent, she said uneasily, for she didn't know what his silences might mean, "And so you lived with that friend, that good man?" "Excellent fellow," Haste responded, with a readiness that she did not expect. "But it was a weakness on my part. I really didn't want to, only he wouldn't let me off, and I couldn't explain. He was the sort of man to whom you can't explain anything. He was extremely sensitive, and it would have been a tigerish thing to do to mangle his delicate feelings by the sort of plain speaking that would have been necessary. His mind was like a white-walled, pure chamber, furnished with, say, 6 straw-bottomed chairs, and he was always placing and displacing them in various combinations. But they were always the same chairs. He was extremely easy to live with, but then he got hold of this coal idea, or rather the idea got hold of him. It entered into that scantily furnished chamber of which I have just spoken, and sat on all the chairs. There was no dislodging it, you know. It was going to make his fortune, my fortune, everybody's fortune. In past years, in moments of doubt that will come to a man determined to remain free from absurdities of existence, I often asked myself, with a momentary dread, in what way would life try to get hold of me? And this was the way. He got it into his head that he could do nothing without me. And was I now, he asked me, to spurn and ruin him? Well, one morning, I wonder if he had gone down on his knees to pray that night. One morning I gave in. Haste tugged violently at a tuft of dried grass and cast it away from him with a nervous gesture. I gave in, he repeated. Looking towards him with a movement of her eyes only, the girl noticed the strong feeling on his face with that intense interest which his person awakened in her mind and in her heart. But it soon passed away, leaving only a moody expression. "It's difficult to resist when nothing matters," he observed. "And perhaps there is a grain of freakishness in my nature. It amused me to go about uttering silly, commonplace phrases. I was never so well thought of in the islands till I began to jabber commercial gibberish like the veriest idiot. Upon my word, I believe that I was actually respected for a time. I was as grave as an owl over it. I had to be loyal to the man. I have been, from first to last, completely, utterly loyal to the best of my ability. I thought he understood something about coal, and if I had been aware that he knew nothing of it, as in fact he didn't, well, I don't know what I could have done to stop him. In one way or another I should have had to be loyal. Truth, work, ambition, love itself, maybe, only counters in the lamentable or despicable game of life. But when one takes a hand, one must play the game. No, the shade of Morrison needn't haunt me. What's the matter? I say, Lena, why are you staring like that? Do you feel ill?" Haste made as if to get on his feet. The girl extended her arm to arrest him, and he remained staring in a sitting posture, propped on one arm, observing her indefinable expression of anxiety, as if she were unable to draw breath. "What has come to you?" he insisted, feeling strangely unwilling to move, to touch her. "Nothing," she swallowed painfully. "Of course it can't be. What name did you say? I didn't hear it properly." "Name?" repeated Haste dazedly. "I only mentioned Morrison. It's the name of that man of whom I've been speaking." "What of it?" "And you mean to say that he was your friend?" "You have heard enough to judge for yourself. You know as much of our connection as I know myself. The people in this part of the world went by appearances, and called us friends, as far as I can remember. Appearances? What more, what better can you ask for? In fact, you can't have better. You can't have anything else." "You're trying to confuse me with your talk," she cried. "You can't make fun of this." "Can't? Well, no, I can't. It's a pity." "Perhaps it would have been the best way," said Haste, in a tone which for him could be called gloomy, "unless one could forget the silly business altogether." His faint playfulness of manner and speech returned, like a habit one has schooled oneself into, even before his forehead had completely cleared. "But why are you looking so hard on me?" "Oh, I don't object, and I shall try not to flinch. Your eyes—" He was looking straight into them, and as a matter of fact had forgotten all about the late Morrison at that moment. "No," he exclaimed suddenly. "What an impenetrable girl you are, Lena, with those grey eyes of yours. Windows of the soul, as some poet has said. The fellow must have been a glazier by vocation. Well, nature has provided excellently for the shyness of your soul." When he ceased speaking, the girl came to herself with a catch of her breath. He heard her voice, the varied charm of which he thought he knew so well, saying with an unfamiliar intonation, "And that partner of yours is dead?" "Morrison? Oh, yes, as I've told you. You never told me." "Didn't I? I thought I did. Or rather, I thought you must know. It seems impossible that anybody with whom I speak should not know that Morrison is dead." She lowered her eyelids, and Haste was startled by something like an expression of horror on her face. "Morrison," she whispered in an appalled tone. "Morrison." Her head drooped. Unable to see her features, Haste could tell from her voice that for some reason or other she was profoundly moved by the syllables of that unromantic name. A thought flashed through his head. Could she have known Morrison? But the mere difference of their origins made it wildly improbable. "This is very extraordinary," he said. "Have you ever heard the name before?" Her head moved quickly several times in tiny affirmative nods, as if she could not trust herself to speak, or even to look at him. She was biting her lower lip. "Did you ever know anybody of that name?" he asked. The girl answered by a negative sign, and then at last she spoke, jerkily, as if forcing herself against some doubt or fear. She had heard of that very man, she told Haste. "Impossible," he said positively. "You are mistaken. You couldn't have heard of him. It's—" He stopped short, with the thought that to talk like this was perfectly useless, that one doesn't argue against thin air. "But I did hear of him. Only I didn't know then. I couldn't guess that it was your partner they were talking about." "Talking about my partner?" repeated Haste slowly. "No." Her mind seemed almost as bewildered, as full of incredulity as his. "No, they were talking of you, really. Only I didn't know it." "Who were they?" Haste raised his voice. "Who was talking of me? Talking where?" With the first question he had lifted himself from his reclining position. At the last he was on his knees before her, their heads on a level. "Why, in that town, in that hotel. Where else could it have been?" she said. The idea of being talked about was always novel to Haste's simplified conception of himself. For a moment he was as much surprised as if he had believed himself to be a mere gliding shadow among men. Besides, he had in him a half-unconscious notion that he was above the level of island gossip. "But you said first that it was of Morrison they talked," he remarked to the girl, sinking on his heels, and no longer much interested. "Strange that you should have the opportunity to hear any talk at all. I was rather under the impression that you never saw anybody belonging to the town except from the platform." "You forget that I was not living with the other girls," she said. "After meals they used to go back to the pavilion, but I had to stay in the hotel and do my sewing or what not in the room where they talked." "I didn't think of that. By the by, you never told me who they were." "Why, that horrible red-faced beast," she said, with all the energy of disgust which the mere thought of the hotel-keeper provoked in her. "Oh, Schomberg," Haste murmured carelessly. "He talked to the boss, to San Giacomo, I mean. I had to sit there. That devil woman sometimes won't let me go away. I mean Mrs. San Giacomo." "I guessed," murmured Haste. "She liked to torment you in a variety of ways. But it is really strange that the hotel-keeper should talk of Morrison to San Giacomo. As far as I can remember, he saw very little of Morrison professionally. He knew many others much better." The girl shuddered slightly. "That was the only name I ever overheard. I would get as far away from them as I could, to the other end of the room. But when that beast started shouting, I couldn't help hearing. I wish I'd never heard anything. If I'd got up and gone out of the room, I don't suppose the woman would have killed me for it, but she would have rowed me in a nasty way. She would have threatened me and called me names. That sort, when they know you are helpless, there's nothing to stop them. I don't know how it is, but bad people, really bad people that you can see are bad, they get over me somehow. It's the way they set about downing one. I'm afraid of wickedness." Haste watched the changing expressions of her face. He encouraged her, profoundly sympathetic, a little amused. "I quite understand. You needn't apologize for the great delicacy in the perception of inhuman evil. I am a little like you." "I'm not very plucky," she said. "Well, I don't know myself what I would do, what countenance I would have before a creature which would strike me as being evil incarnate. Don't you be ashamed." She sighed, looked up with her pale, candid gaze and a timid expression on her face, and murmured, "You don't seem to want to know what he was saying." "About poor Morrison? It couldn't have been anything bad, for the poor fellow was innocence itself. And then, you know, he is dead. Nothing can possibly matter to him now." "But I tell you that it was of you he was talking," she cried. "He was saying that Morrison's partner first got all there was to get out of him, and then, well, as good as murdered him, sent him out to die somewhere." "You believe that of me?" said Haste, after a moment of perfect silence. "I didn't know it had anything to do with you. Schomberg was talking of some Swede. How was I to know? It was only when you began telling me about how you came here. And now you have my version. Haste forced himself to speak quietly. "So that's how the business looked from outside," he muttered. "I remember him saying that everybody in these parts knew the story," the girl added breathlessly. "Strange that it should hurt me," mused Haste to himself, "yet it does. I seem to be as much of a fool as those everybodies who know the story and no doubt believe it. Can you remember any more?" he addressed the girl in a grimly polite tone. "I've often heard of the moral advantages of seeing oneself as others see one. Let us investigate further. Can't you recall something else that everybody knows?" "Oh, don't laugh," she cried. "Did I laugh? I assure you I was not aware of it. I won't ask you whether you believe the hotel-keeper's version. Surely you must know the value of human judgment." She unclasped her hands, moved them slightly, and twined her fingers as before. Protest? Assent? Was there to be nothing more? He was relieved when she spoke in that warm and wonderful voice, which in itself comforted and fascinated one's heart, which made her lovable. "I heard this before you and I ever spoke to each other. It went out of my memory afterwards. Everything went out of my memory then, and I was glad of it. It was a fresh start for me with you, and you know it. I wish I'd forgotten who I was. That would have been best, and I very nearly did forget." He was moved by the vibrating quality of the last words. She seemed to be talking low of some wonderful enchantment, in mysterious terms of special significance. He thought that if she only could talk to him in some unknown tongue, she would enslave him altogether by the sheer beauty of the sound, suggesting infinite depths of wisdom and feeling. "But," she went on, "the name stuck in my head, it seems, and when you mentioned it—" "It broke the spell," muttered Haste, in angry disappointment, as if he had been deceived in some hope. The girl, from her position a little above him, surveyed with still eyes the abstracted silence of the man on whom she now depended, with a completeness of which she had not been vividly conscious before, because, till then, she had never felt herself swinging between the abysses of earth and heaven in the hollow of his arm. What if he should grow weary of the burden? And, moreover, nobody had ever believed that tale. Haste came out with an abrupt burst of sound, which made her open her steady eyes wider, with an effect of immense surprise. It was a purely mechanical effect, because she was neither surprised nor puzzled. In fact, she could understand him better then than at any moment since she first set eyes on him. He laughed scornfully. "What am I thinking of?" he cried. "As if it could matter to me what anybody had ever said or believed, from the beginning of the world till the crack of doom." "I never heard you laugh till to-day," she observed. "This is the second time." He scrambled to his feet and towered above her. "That's because when one's heart has been broken into in the way you have broken into mine, all sorts of weaknesses are free to enter. Shame, anger, stupid indignation, stupid fears, stupid laughter too. I wonder what interpretation you are putting on it." "It wasn't gay, certainly," she said. "But why are you angry with me? Are you sorry you took me away from those beasts? I told you who I was. You could see it." "Heavens, heavens," he muttered. He had regained his command of himself. "I assure you I could see much more than you could tell me. I could see quite a lot that you don't even suspect yet, but you can't be seen quite through." He sank to the ground by her side and took her hand. She asked gently, "What more do you want from me?" He made no sound for a time. "The impossible, I suppose," he said very low, as one makes a confidence, and pressing the hand he grasped. It did not return the pressure. He shook his head as if to drive away the thought of this, and added in a louder, light tone, "Nothing less. And it isn't because I think little of what I've got already. Oh, no. It is because I think so much of this possession of mine that I can't have it complete enough. I know it's unreasonable. You can't hold anything back now." "Indeed, couldn't," she whispered, letting her hand lie passive in his tight grasp. "I only wish I could give you something more, or better, or whatever it is you want." He was touched by the sincere accent of these simple words. "I tell you what you can do. You can tell me whether you would have gone with me like this if you had known of whom that abominable idiot of a hotel keeper was speaking. A murderer, no less. But I didn't know you at all then, she cried, and I had the sense to understand what he was saying. It wasn't murder, really. I never thought it was. What made him invent such an atrocity? Haste exclaimed. He seems a stupid animal. He is stupid. How did he manage to hatch that pretty tale? Have I a particularly vile countenance? Is black selfishness written all over my face? Or is that sort of thing so universally human that it might be said of anybody? It wasn't murder, she insisted earnestly. I know, I understand. It was worse. As to killing a man, which would be a comparatively decent thing to do, well, I have never done that. Why should you do it? She asked in a frightened voice. My dear girl, you don't know the sort of life I've been leading in unexplored countries, in the wilds. It's difficult to give you an idea. There are men who haven't been in such tight places as I have found myself in, who have had to shed blood, as the saying is. Even the wilds hold prizes which tempt some people. But I had no schemes, no plans, and not even great firmness of mind to make me unduly obstinate. I was simply moving on, while the others, perhaps, were going somewhere. An indifference as to roads and purposes makes one meeker, as it were. And I may say truly, too, that I never did care. I won't say for life. I had scorned what people call by that name from the first, but for being alive. I don't know if that is what men call courage, but I doubt it very much. You have no courage, she protested. I really don't know. Not the sort that always itches for a weapon, for I have never been anxious to use one in the quarrels that a man gets into, in the most innocent way sometimes. The differences for which men murder each other are, like everything else they do, the most contemptible, the most pitiful things to look back upon. No, I've never killed a man or loved a woman, not even in my thoughts, not even in my dreams. He raised her hand to his lips and let them rest on it for a space, during which she moved a little closer to him. After the lingering kiss, he did not relinquish his hold. To slay, to love, the greatest enterprises of life upon a man, and I have no experience of either. You must forgive me anything that may have appeared to you awkward in my behaviour, inexpressive in my speeches, untimely in my silences. He moved uneasily, a little disappointed by her attitude, but indulgent to it, and feeling in this moment of perfect quietness that in holding her surrendered hand he had found a closer communion than they had ever achieved before. But even then there still lingered in him a sense of incompleteness, not altogether overcome, which, it seemed, nothing would ever overcome, the fatal imperfection of all the gifts of life, which makes of them a delusion and a snare. All of a sudden he squeezed her hand angrily. His delicately playful equanimity, the product of kindness and scorn, had perished with the loss of his bitter liberty. Not murder, you say? I should think not. But when you led me to talk just now, when the name turned up, when you understood that it was of me that these strange things had been said, you showed a strange emotion. I could see it. I was a bit startled, she said. At the baseness of my conduct? He asked. I wouldn't judge you. Not for anything. Really? It would be as if I dared to judge everything that there is. With her other hand she made a gesture that seemed to embrace in one movement the earth and the heaven. I wouldn't do such a thing. Then came a silence, broken at last by haste. I? Do a deadly wrong to my poor Morrison? He cried. I, who could not bear to hurt his feelings. I, who respected his very madness. Yes, this madness, the wreck of which you see lying about the jetty of Diamond Bay. What else could I do? He insisted on regarding me as his saviour. He was always restraining the eternal obligation on the tip of his tongue, till I was burning with shame at his gratitude. What could I do? He was going to repay me with this infernal coal, and I had to join him as one joins a child's game in a nursery. One would no more have thought of humiliating him than one would think of humiliating a child. What's the use of talking of all this? Of course the people here could not understand the truth of our relation to each other. But what business of theirs was it? Kill old Morrison? Well, it is less criminal, less base, I am not saying it is less difficult, to kill a man than to cheat him in that way. You understand that? She nodded slightly, but more than once and with evident conviction. His eyes rested on her, inquisitive, ready for tenderness. But it was neither one nor the other, he went on. Then why your emotion? All you confess is that you wouldn't judge me. She turned upon him her veiled, unseeing grey eyes, in which nothing of her wonder could be read. I said I couldn't, she whispered. But you thought that there was no smoke without fire. The playfulness of tone hardly concealed his irritation. What power there must be in words, only imperfectly heard, for you did not listen with particular care, did you? What were they? What evil effort of invention drove them into that idiot's mouth out of his lying throat? If you were to try to remember, they would perhaps convince me too. I didn't listen, she protested. What was it to me what they said of anybody? He was saying that there were never such loving friends to look at as you two. Then, when you got all you wanted out of him and got thoroughly tired of him too, you kicked him out to go home and die. Indignation, with an undercurrent of some other feeling, rang in those quoted words, uttered in her pure and enchanting voice. She ceased abruptly and lowered her long dark lashes, as if mortally weary, sick at heart. Of course, why shouldn't you get tired of that, or any other company? You aren't like anybody else, and the thought of it made me unhappy suddenly. But indeed I didn't believe anything bad of you. A brusque movement of his arm, flinging her hand away, stopped her short. Haste had again lost control of himself. He would have shouted if shouting had been in his character. No, this earth must be the appointed hatching planet of calumny enough to furnish the whole universe. I feel a disgust at my own person, as if I had tumbled into some filthy hole. Pah! And you, all you can say is that you won't judge me, that you... She raised her head at this attack, though indeed he had not turned to her. I don't believe anything bad of you, she repeated. I couldn't. He made a gesture as if to say, That's sufficient. In his soul and in his body he experienced a nervous reaction from tenderness. All at once, without transition, he detested her, but only for a moment. He remembered that she was pretty, and more, that she had a special grace in the intimacy of life. She had the secret of individuality which excites and escapes. He jumped up and began to walk to and fro. Presently his hidden fury fell into dust within him, like a crazy structure, leaving behind emptiness, desolation, regret. His resentment was not against the girl, but against life itself, that commonest of snares, in which he felt himself caught, seeing clearly the plot of plots and unconsoled by the lucidity of his mind. He swerved, and stepping up to her, sank to the ground by her side. Before she could make a movement or even turn her head his way, he took her in his arms and kissed her lips. He tasted on them the bitterness of a tear fallen there. He had never seen her cry. It was like another appeal to his tenderness, a new seduction. The girl glanced round, moved suddenly away, and averted her face. With her hand she signed imperiously to him to leave her alone, a command which Haste did not obey.